Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. This is full, that is full and complete. The full comes out of the full, and taking this full from the full itself remains, or perfection itself remains. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So these last few weeks we have been discussing the Upanishad, and I think we were going to carry on from the 9th stanza, but we'll pause a little bit to take comments and questions before we go into that.
Swamiji, going back to the translation of some of these words, so avidya was translated as rights. So I was curious, why was it translated that way? And then, so the other translation you already explained, the vidya being the meditation, but so, the avidya, ignorance being the rights, that part I still didn't catch.
Okay, all right. So avidya really means, and when you use these terms of blinding darkness, then you're saying that we didn't perceive something correctly, or we're not perceiving something at all. And so there are a number of cross-references we have to make in order to understand why this interpretation should be so. So we can, for example, there is a passage in the Upanishad. So, Andam tamaha pravishanti ye vidyam upasati. Into blind darkness enter they who worship ignorance. Into greater darkness than that, as it were, they that delight in knowledge. And so avidya really is to do with works. And then we have to understand what these various worlds are to do with. Those 3 worlds are supposed to be there. So we can see from the next passage in the Upanishad, those worlds covered with blind darkness are called joyless. To them after death go those people who have not knowledge, who are not awakened. So we can see that if you want to secure this world and the fruits of it, and if you want to secure an afterworld, which is something like that, then you can attend to ritualistic activities. We find this in all religions. In all religions, we'll see how ritualism has been elevated. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, in his famous summary understanding of what is Raja Yoga, he says each soul is potentially divine. He goes on like that, to manifest the divinity from within. That's our goal. And then he also says in that same passage further on that books and temples and dogmas and doctrines, rituals and so on are but secondary details. Now they do have an effect, they do have a fruit, because the understanding of a ritual, any activity, is accompanied by a mental movement. But if the mental movement is to do with some kind of result, whatever intention is put out, that's what you get. And so this is not really attending to Swami Vivekananda's first purport, that is, each soul is divine, each soul is potentially divine. And the goal is to manifest that from within. In fact, actually, if we pick up what Swami Vivekananda says in his preface to this Raja Yoga, he'll say that surface scientists, unable to explain the various extraordinary mental phenomena, strive to ignore their very existence. And he's saying that they are more culpable than those who think that their prayers are answered by a being or beings above their clouds. or than those who believe that their petitions will make such beings change the course of the universe. The latter have the excuse of ignorance, or at least of a defective system of education, which has taught them dependence upon such things. In other words, they're only seeing the perceptive side of human nature. So with that in mind, I put a few words on the board here. Just move it so you can see it. So we have to understand that ultimately there's an absolute called Brahman. And that Brahman, according to the Vedanta philosophy, is exactly the same as the internal immortal self. Don't forget, Upanishad has told us, he sees the self in all beings in the self. The passage goes like that. But then there is a dotted line here. We can take the one above as pure being. And then something happens. And we have something which is relatively unmanifest. A potentiality being held there, along with all the various qualities, omnipresence, omniscience, and so on, that we find in a God. And it is this entity that is described as Isha. But it is not different or separate from Brahman. It is only apparently so. When you add the potentiality of space and time and function, then, and that manifests more, it comes out as a manifesting cause. When we inquire what is the cause of something, we can do it on every level. So what is the cause of seeing the sky? Well, the sky is there, the eyes are there, but we can't see with the eyes, we can't see beyond that. Nor can we see behind us simultaneously. There are limitations. And so as more and more manifestations come into effect, in other words, as the cause itself manifests as an effect and becomes more and more individuated, then it becomes equated to the organs of perception ultimately. Organs of perception form several classes. One class will be the same material that the object is comprised of, comprises the organ as well. In other words, the eyes and the ears and all the rest of it, and this face that you're unfortunately looking at, this is made from yesterday's food, probably bananas. Now, I don't look like a banana, maybe. So you can see there's some transformation that occurs from within. There is always a transforming entity that acts ultimately as a cause. And you may say the cause of this present body will be the material food that was fed in, and then the digestive capacity that is able to transform it. You can say it in that way, in which case you're presenting a causal level here at this level of perception. But this is really a level of ignorance. If we were to understand the reality, see, there's a philosophy called realism. But now in the light of modern science and our philosophy, we understand that realism is actually unrealism. What we deem to be knowledge is actually ignorance. And when we do any kinds of works or activities to sustain this level, naturally we're entering into, and what a wonderful phrase, blinding darkness. Now, when the moon is not really shining too well, and when it's waned to its maximum, and before it starts waxing again, there is a period of darkness where you can't even see your hand. Now add to that blindness, you have a wonderful description. So blinding darkness. Can there be more blinding darkness than that? Yes. Supposing you want to go to this level here, where there is manifestations. Manifestations in this language is called the devas, unfortunately called gods. Very bad translation. It simply means shining ones. It means illuminating or revealing factors. It is the subtle essences. You can personalize these also as deities. It's all right. Supposing from here you personalize these and you drop off all the ritualism. In other words, the effects of doing ritual here is dropped. Then unfortunately you don't get the benefits here, and you try to do it from here and become an armchair philosopher. Not really doing anything, going into more blinding darkness because there's an arrogance that comes with it. And both of these cases, both the case of Avicia and Vidya as it's described, that is doing something with an element of understanding and knowledge, but it's misdirected as well. Because all you're doing is you're gaining this here. So supposing you pray for some result, and you think you're praying to God, a single monotheistic God, because you're praying to an entity that is bestowing some result on you, it's actually equivalent to praying to the functional aspect of it, and that is called a deva. So for this reason, you have to actually combine these two. You have to understand these two, but over and above that, you have to understand what is the central purpose of life. And so to do that, you have to say, things are caused here, no doubt. And things are caused here. The things that cause here cause this, but it's not the end of the causation trail. Then you have to then go to this unmanifested cause. If you stay on the unmanifested cause, you will make a mistake that nature is self-sustaining. You become a naturalist or atheist. I'll only invest all my energy into getting what I want and getting the result here through ritual here, and then through just an intellectual understanding of something, and not a proper investigation. What is the root cause of everything? So everywhere I'm drawing a line is a darkness. So greater than that are those who are meditating on the subtle forces that create a result for me in the next life. In this life too, but primarily I'm concerned about the next life. Now, in religions, you'll find all of this. What is the goal? You ask some Christians, for example. I'm not picking on Christians, but the same thing for anybody who has the same theology. So what is your goal? Why do you want to be religious? Why do you want to do all these biblical studies and all the rest of it? And the answer is to get to heaven. And if you take it to its extreme, a misunderstanding of scripture, the quicker you get to heaven, the better. So you can become a suicide bomber. Suicide bomber means I get to heaven quicker, and then I enjoy all the luxuries that I can't get in the desert. So in other words, it's a glorified earthly holiday camp. So you're going into further blinding darkness. Actually, the goal of this unity is not understood. So it is this unity that we have to understand. As long as we are interpreting everything in a divisive way, as long as we're seeing all the parts and taking that seriously, it is ignorance. The whole thing is ignorance. As soon as we have crossed this line here, we've got ignorance of our primal cause. Now, the primal cause will out of necessity be both the material and the efficient cause. So now you can probably see. So we can take that passage now just to further explain it and put Swami Vivekananda there onto one side. You see, if you don't interpret avidya in the way that Shankaracharya interprets it, that is a ceremonial piety. Ceremonial piety. You do this, but don't do that. Light a candle and you'll be saved. Don't light a candle, or difficult. Somebody was asking me yesterday, what about funeral rites for a relative? I feel awkward when I don't perform them, but because of COVID virus, I can't get to a place and so on and so forth. So this is emphasis on ritualism. It equates to superstition if you don't really understand what the benefit is. And so the beauty, referring to Raja Yoga, the beauty about that is Swami Vivekananda describes it as the science of religion. And in the science of religion, we don't accept anything if it's irrational. And if it does not conform to the scientific process. What is the scientific process? Get a credible authority somewhere. And in that credible authority, you take provisionally what is there to be true. And then what's the next thing? You form a model. You have some kind of thing described in a scripture. The scripture is authoritative in the sense that is a record of somebody who says, I have seen the truth, I have felt the soul, and you can do the same. And this is a handbook. We can call it scripture. And we can ignore those parts, which are sand, not sugar. What do we mean by that? I don't know if it's to my eternal benefit if I know who begat who and who begat who and who begat who, a genealogy. Or is it to my benefit to know whether the walls of Jericho were blasted or not? But there are beautiful gems in every scripture. We have to look for the sugar of it, the sweet aspects of it. So we do not simply close a biblical text and say, I can't understand anything because it seems to be all mixed up and I don't know what the value is. The value is that is a record of somebody who says, I have this direct experience. Remember last week I was saying, our aim is this cognitive experience. I have to understand firsthand what is going on. So if I'm simply doing rites and rituals, no doubt there's a result, but actually, if I'm doing it from a point of ignorance, then I have to call it what it is. It's ignorance, avidya. On the other hand, if I think that something is vidya in contrast to that, and I leave off the rituals, even the rituals I leave off, and go into the intellectual headspace, with certain intentions, no doubt, that brings a fruit, then it's even worse. Now put it in a different context. Supposing I understand all the philosophical principles and I decide that I will just meditate the whole of my life and not doing anything, then as the Bhagavad Gita points out, bare maintenance of the body will not be possible. So that is also an ignorant position. In the name of knowledge, it's actually ignorant. And so there's a practical dimension to this issue of Upanishad. It says, bearing in mind your absolute goal at the top, still perform all your duties, all your activities. And if it wasn't like that, we wouldn't have teachers. The beauty about the great lives of those special, huge waves that come and inspire us for centuries on end, the life of Buddha, Jesus, Ramakrishna, the beauty about those is they became men and dwelt amongst us. They taught us how to work. They taught us how to mobilize our feelings and direct them in a compassionate way. They didn't withdraw from anything. They said, please fully engage, but shift your attitude, make a right attitude toward it. So this is why Shankaracharya interprets, and he's really referring to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad on this. And that's not the only place that we find reference to these explanations also. Let us, for example, take up one understanding of what these three worlds are. So this is the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and it is actually referred to in the commentary here in the Upanishad. So we're talking of the first section, or the fifth subsection, and the 16th stanza. Vatatrayo vavalokaha, manusya lokaha, pitra lokaha, deva lokaha iti. Now there are truly three worlds. The world of men. The world of men is here, below this line, here. Then the world of the fathers and the world of the gods. The world of the fathers is also here, but not physically present. And then the world of the devas, Devaloka. This world of men is to be obtained through procreation, leading a life, household life, having progeny, earning a living, and all the things that are associated with that. Not by any other work. That's the work that is done for that, to sustain your welfare in this world. And the world of the ancestors and so on will be the world of rights, Avicia. And the world of the gods by knowledge. The world of the deities, of devas, is truly better than that. And so, better than that in the one sense, in the sense of the fruit that you get, but it hasn't gotten to the root. So with an attitude of arrogance and conceit, you say, I've got something higher. That means actually your ignorance is compounded. Well, let us take up the stanza itself, and you're probably following it by now in that Upanishad set out with Shankaracharya's commentary. So those who worship Avicia, rights, enter into blinding darkness, but into greater darkness than that enter those who are engaged in Vidya, meditation on the deities, on the subtle mobilizing forces. Now the commentary will go like this, and each word is mentioned in Sanskrit, so we make no mistake. So of these two, they, pravishanti, enter into andam tamaha, a beautiful phrase, blinding darkness. And that is blinding darkness characterized by the absence of perception. And who are they? Those who actually worship this avidya. And avidya is different from vidya, distinguished because karma, that is actions or work, is opposed to knowledge inherently, by definition. So that avidya in the form of ceremonials such as fire lighting ceremony, agnihotra, etc., the import is that they perform this wholeheartedly. Tata, then that darkness, so in other words, they're worshipping, and that darkness characterized as blindness into greater darkness. Who is it who enters into greater darkness? Those who give up these rights completely and who are engaged in so-called vidya, that is the opposite of the avidya, the rights. They're always bent on meditation on and worship of what? Devas, gods. They miss the train. They miss the whole causal connection. So with regard to that matter, again, the separate secondary results of meditation and rites are advanced as reasons for the combination of the two, as otherwise, if one of these two closely associated factors bore fruit when the other did not, they would be related as the part and the whole, which is absurd. So one has a function, the other has a function. To clarify that, the next stanza comes. So the next stanza will tell us that they, I'll just elucidate before I go on to that, you see. The state of those who are lost in ignorance and cling to external props, these are deemed to be the most pitiable because superstition is there. And I just read from the very beginning of Raja Yoga. You might say they have an excuse, but the people of science have no excuse. They should know better. They should investigate the thing properly. But the state of those who are intellectually learned, but spiritually poor, that's even worse. At least the ritualists are sincere in their ritualism, albeit ignorance. But those who have just left that off and dismissed it, thinking they have a higher way, that conceit, the darkness of intellectual conceit is worse than that of ignorance. All right, so anyad evahu vijaya, anyad ahu avidyaya. Distinct, so distinct, that is, they who say that by vidya, a really different result is achieved, and they that say that by avidya, a different result is achieved, it's not. Those who have we heard the teaching of those wise men who explained that to us? In other words, there are these different aims are there. Really different is produced as a result. And because of the Vedic texts that is contained in Upanishad that I just referred to, which says these three worlds are there. And they ascend there through meditation. And I mentioned last week, meditation is not an automatically enlightening process because Ravana was a meditator. All meditation means is intense concentration. Everybody is meditating. But what are they meditating on? COVID virus. That's what most people are meditating on today. So the purport of it is that this is their knowledge that is traditionally received, and any important statement is not claimed personally. The wise are telling us this. In other words, the original authority. Don't forget the criteria for the science of religion is like the same as the science of everything else. You get a credible authority as purported by the scriptures. You then test it out. And testing out means you go along the recommended spiritual avenues. You do the experiment. That experiment is called yoga. So he who knows these two, vidya and avidya, together will attain immortality, but immortality is not the goal. Immortality is a relative thing. Heaven is a relative thing. And through vidya, by crossing over death through avidya, so that means that, you see, vidya is equated with knowledge of deities. Just let's be clear on that. In other words, it's as material as anything. And avidya with karma, that is works and activities. And so here, by the way, Shankaracharya makes out that by the performance of the rites, we can overcome death. That's the purpose of them. And by the meditation on the deities, we attain the realm of the deities. You can call it immortality. It goes on for a long, long time. And so here's another thing, and that is whatever we meditate on, we go to. We get the result of whatever the attention is involved in, fully involved in. So therefore, supposing we take any of these aspects and understand that it is essentially that supreme principle. It is the supreme principle we go to. And then that is real immortality. And so, by the meditation on deities, we attain immortality, and which is becoming one with the deity meditated upon. It's called Amrita or Amritam Divat Bhavam. There's a text called the Vedanta Deshika, and it quotes a certain verse that is said that by austerity we destroy sins, by wisdom we attain life eternal. What a beautiful, beautiful distinction. So it's no good at tackling the one end and not the other. So often in theology, we come to this misunderstanding that we have to make corrections. I'm dealing with somebody, for example, in London, who is in a critical, potentially critical, dangerous position with cancer. And they are hooked into the paradigm of negativity. So the language is, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. It's a psychological language. Even people who have marital problems, you have to work on your marriage. So I don't see it like that. What I see it is that you have to engage the positive always, just as when you watch a sunset or sunrise, are you working on it? Are you working on something joyful and glorious? Or are you spontaneously delighting in it? So that is called wisdom. Yeah. The other one is a struggle. The other one is designed to destroy defects, working on it. The other one is designed to have a new approach, a new outlook, and fill the mind with that. That's called wisdom. So we don't agree, obviously, and Swami Vivekananda is adamant, as was Sri Ramakrishna, his master. If you say you're a sinner, that's what you'll be a sinner. And so ultimately, we have to come to a conclusion. I am that. But here's the danger. If we say that, if we identify with the self without truly understanding it, without the wisdom, then we fall into the vidya category of those entering into even more blinding darkness. Because it's not true, because when we say I, we really mean the I of perception, the I of bodily existence, the I of limitations, the I of egocentric identity. That's the danger. So works, though they don't by themselves lead to the ultimate, which is really freedom, they are also actually helpful in preparing our hearts for it. So it's not that we are saying avidya is wrong. There's no morality, there's no moral judgment in it. For how do we get to a position of true knowledge? We have to get to true knowledge from our ignorant state. And without the ignorant state, how can we go on further? So the ignorant state is there, the acknowledgement is there, no doubt, but let's not harp on it. And if you wish to call that ignorance sin, that's fine. Declare it once, and then say, this is my status quo, and then go on from there. How do I lift myself up? The most beautiful, beautiful passage, quoted time and time again, will be there in the Bhagavad Gita, that raise yourself up by yourself. Don't lower yourself by yourself. You are your own best friend or your own worst enemy. Supposing every child of 9 is taught this great lesson, they would have the opportunity to think in a brand new way. They'll have the opportunity to exploit and explore their full potential to its maximum. So actually, this avidya, this dedication to works and so on and so forth, is regarded actually as an essential prerequisite for spiritual life. You can't rise to spiritual enlightenment if you haven't first gone through this blinding darkness, avidya, and without being conscious of oneself in a sense of a separate ego, which is really the source of all of that. So in spiritual life, we transcend the sense of separateness. That's really. And all of this is emphasizing separateness, except when you get to the very top. And then, of course, the endowment of the intellectuality or this avidya is justified on the ground that it creates a condition for its own transformation. So if we remain just at the intellectual level and look upon it only as a means or not only as a means, but rather as an end in itself, then we've made a huge, huge error. The knowledge of discursive reasoning is also essential. We're not denying it, but it is a step on the way. It's not the ultimate. It has to be transcended into this life of the spirit. So avidya is transcended by vidya, and vidya is transcended by the ultimate. The ultimate knowledge is then real cognitive understanding. So then that brings us then to the next understanding of it. So before we go on, I'll ask if that clarifies. I said it would be more interactive this session, so I'm going to pause and see, does that make sense?
Yes, Swamiji, it was clear. Thank you.
Sorry, could I ask you just on the whiteboard, the second words there are just hard to come out. If you could just help us with that, please.
Unmanifest.
Ah, yes, Brahman absolute.
Okay.
We've just lost that. That's good. Yeah, Brahman, thank you. Unmanifest cause, manifesting cause, avidya. Just the 5 deities perceive, manifest. Thank you very much.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
By austerity, what does it mean by austerity? It's really a purifying process. The English language is difficult in the sense that austerity could mean, if you study the lives of medieval saints in Christianity, it's whipping the back or wearing a hair shirt or something of that nature. It must have been excruciating because in those days they never bathed. And they thought water was the medium for a disease. And so you can imagine the body full of lice. I mentioned last week, of course, already it's there. But anyway, so the body full of lice crawling. Now you put a hair shirt where they can breathe nicely. And we have somebody here who's itching already, just thinking about the whole thing. So not like that, not austerity in that sense. If you want a good idea of what is austerities, no finer reference could be there than the Bhagavad Gita. And this whole understanding of tapas has to be appreciated. When we go back to the etymology of something, we'll appreciate what it really means. Tapas means a heat that is caused by friction. T-A-P-A-S, yeah, tapas. It's not a Spanish food. All right, so it's a heat. How do we generate heat? There has to be friction. When you boil a kettle, you're starting off with cold water, And the heating element now agitates the molecules. And ultimately, the molecules, then you can imagine them being disturbed nicely, and these all separate. Instead of being all clumped together, they all separate. And you can't do it the other way. You can go from heat, see, you can't go from, when leaving it there, you can't go from hot to cold. You have to go from cold, the heat transfers to the cold surface. And the reason for that is the molecules that are in the temperature, which we call cold, are more or less staying there, not doing much. Their density is more. And then when you agitate these molecules, they have more of a chance of bashing into things. So the law of thermodynamics works on probability. It is more probable that a cup of tea will get cold than that a cold fluid will get hot, unless you put something into it. So tapas is simply purifying, and 3 areas we have to look at. So one area we have to look at is the body. This is purity of the body has to be there. Then there has to be purity of speech. And then there has to be purity of the mind. These 3 things together, thought, word, and deed, constitute tapas. And the whole purpose of it, the effect of it is purifying, but the purpose of it is to increase and strengthen the will. That's really what it is. That is why people undergo extraordinary discipline. It strengthens the will. And strength is really the key value in not only spiritual life, but every endeavor. So let's look then at the manifest and unmanifest and see, is really endorsing what has gone before, but in the light of this diagram, we'll understand better. So with a view to combining the worship of the manifest and the unmanifest, each is being denounced separately. So those who worship the unmanifested, you get the idea from the board here, the unmanifested. That is, who thinks that nature is causing everything. This is called modern day atheism. Everything is attributed to nature. What is consciousness? Consciousness is being examined as a critical thing. We can understand almost everything, or we can try to understand everything. But then for the first time in physics, the question of the observer has come in. And can I be just a bunch of chemicals thrown together by chance? But then there's a sense of I can't deny it. And it seems to be something separate. It seems to be an entity that has the capacity to choose. And although it may be under the illusion of linear time, it has the capacity to perceive a flow and to have the capacity to use it and put something useful into it. So those who worship this unmanifested, this nature, this umbrella thing, enter into blinding darkness because they have missed the fact that it is causally connected with the absolute. But those who are devoted to the manifested, that is, all these things, including powers. One thing we do if we are going to worship the devas, then very often it is because we want siddhis, certain powers that the devas have. We want to control over all the subtle elements, subtle forces of nature. And so that is also blinding darkness. It is illustrated in a number of stories from Ramakrishna. I'll give you 2 of them. So there were 2 brothers. One became a yogi sitting, meditating for many, many years. The other person was a person who just went about his normal, so-called normal daily business, married, had children, was happy and content. And they met. Oh, brother, great yogi, all these years you meditated, you left your home. After all these years, what did you achieve? And the yogi says, look at this. See this river here? Watch. And he closes his eyes, meditates a little bit, gets up and walks on the water. This is a well-known siddhi, the capacity to defy gravity. Walks on the water. The householder shrugs his shoulders, pays a little fee for a ferry and goes across by ferry. He says, so what was the point of all that? You spent all these years doing this. You crossed the water, I crossed the water. What's the difference? Then the other example given, see this elephant? Elephant died, the elephant collapses like a corpse. Elephant lived. And the brother says, shakes his head, did you see that? The brother says, I saw an elephant die, I saw an elephant live. I can see that every day if I want. So what is the whole reason for this? So again, this manifested, that is this Hiranyagarbha, that is this manifesting cause. That means everything that is manifested from it. Now, does that mean to say, well, you misunderstand, that we should not take a God and worship God either as in unmanifest form or manifest form? Manifest form means personal God. No, that's not what it means at all. It means that if you think these two are separate, and if you think these are separate from this supreme absolute, you have made a huge mistake. And so, Prakriti is the primal material cause. That is its ignorance. And so some various synonyms for this Prakriti, nature. Prakriti means something rough and not refined. Some synonyms for that would be Maya. That is an apparitional thing that produces the mistake that we call the world. And it is therefore also called Avicia. So this avyaktra, that is this unmanifest, and those who upasate worship this asambhuti, that is this one which is known as the unmanifest Prakriti, the cause, and which is also itself ignorance, which is the seed of desire and work, because our misunderstanding of it and our sense of separateness all around, then we enter into various egoistic activities, body-centered activities, to try to satisfy all these desires which disturb the mind. And and is blinding by nature. They enter into it, blinding darkness, which is of similar nature. You worship darkness, darkness is what you'll get. And then greater, as it were, eva, is an important distinguishing term. So this tamha, darkness, pravishanti, they enter those who sambhutyam, rataha, are devoted to sambhuti, to the manifested Brahman, that is called Hiranyagarbha. So in this verse, says the commentator, are being stated the results of the two constituent worships, which results necessitate the combination of those worships. And they spoke of, again, just as we have compared previously, what are the results? They spoke of a different result from the worship of the manifested, that is, all the powers and all the various favors and fulfillment of desires that come from that alone. It's as materialist as anything else. So the idea is that they spoke of the result comprising supernormal faculties, such as becoming subtle, walking on water, etc., 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 accruing from the worship of the manifested Brahman. Similarly to, I should tell you, you see that behind all of this that we call the universe, there are subtle forces. And mastery of these subtle forces will create also a finite end. Let me give you an example from the Vedic rituals. We can see the evolution of religion when we study the Vedic religion. In the ancient days, there were great, great wonders about all the forces of nature and how to explain it. And they gave wonderful qualities to that and decided that we would try and get abundance by propitiating these forces. They light a fire, fire being the most significant discovery of man. They light the fire and put our prayers and do ritualism. Then they realized, the key to all these prayers is the intentions we put in the form of mantras. Stemming back from the root manas, mind. So a movement is taking place. We are not subject to the deities. We are masters of the deities. We control them through mantras. So the intention which is there is not leading you to an ultimate freedom. So similarly to they, Anyat Ahu, spoke of a different result. Asambhavat from asambhuti, avyaktra from the worship of the unmanifested, and that which has been referred to, they enter into blinding darkness, and it's called absorption into primordial nature. We can imagine it as a period of quiescence dominated by darkness, tamas. Thus, Shashtrumna, Dhiranam, we have heard the speech of the wise, don't take it from me. This is from them who've experienced it also. There's the validation for it. So since this is so, and since both are meant for the same human goal, it's proper to combine the worship of the manifest, the unmanifest. When you combine these two, it becomes much better. And therefore, he who knows these two, this unmanifested and the destruction that is Hiranyagarbha together, ultimately, when you understand the synthesis of this, that it is all one entity, not divided, then you attain true immortality through the unmanifest by crossing death. And you do it through this destruction. Now, there's a beautiful subtext commentary there, if you're following the same text. Maya, depending on consciousness and acting as a limiting adjunct of the Supreme Lord, is well known in the other Vedic texts. Know Maya as Prakriti, and Maya, therefore, is the material cause. Therefore, our ignorance is perpetuated and established by this material cause. And the great Lord as the processor of Maya, that Maya and not Brahman is spoken of here by the word unmanifest, because the word avyaktam, unmanifest, is used in three contexts. First, as the supreme principle, then as this conditioned principle, which we call prakriti, and thirdly, we put this as agasha. That is the first area, we can call it a material field, or some people interpret it as space. Now, there are a lot of people who object to Agasha being registered as space, but I think it's entirely appropriate because our modern science tells us that space is actually a gravitational field, and space and matter are probably not different. Because if you think that space is a void, you'll be mistaken. You can think more of space as a kind of ocean. And so we were studying yesterday with some devotees, and we were discussing the Tuesday talk when we looked at a story from a Chandogya Upanishad. And there a certain aspect of this ultimate principle called Brahman is described. And this is all to do with the manifest aspect of Brahman, that one unity that looks diverse. And by looking at these various examples, these various so-called paths, it leads us to an understanding of that which is not different from them, but transcends them and is also immanent in them. So what are these? It describes the earth. We're trying to get to a point where we understand a limitless, something that is close to infinity. So the earth plus all the heavens, plus the interspace, plus ocean. And I was pointing out, which seems to be the odd person out. Isn't it ocean? But then when you look out at the ocean, you can catch a sense of infinity. You don't know where the horizon is. The horizon is just a line, and you know when you get to that line, it's going on. So that's the one thing. But if you look very carefully at the physics of it, the whole of space is seen as something like an ocean. It is actually a fabric. Einstein calls it space-time, the fabric of space-time. So it is not simply a gap or a nothingness, unbeknown to your eye, unbeknown to your human perception. It is more something like a very flexible ocean consisting of waves. And just as any vessel put into a body of water will displace the water, this is how Einstein saw the gravitational effects, mass on space-time. All right, so now it's past 12. So I'm going to leave some time for questions and so on. And then I thought we'd finish off today, but we'll finish off next week with the last stanza. And that won't take us too long, but so we'll do that, and then we'll have an overall view, as I promised, of this issue Upanishad. So we'll leave it at that then, all right? The beautiful Upanishad, this issue Upanishad, and extremely profound. And all these Upanishads, just to remind you, have these three dimensions to it. It tells us about the principles of existence itself, but it also tells us about how to conduct our lives in order to get to a direct perceptive understanding of it, and also provides us material for meditation itself. So we'll leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.